Let's see where we can go in 2 Samuel chapter 3. 2 Samuel chapter 3 seems insignificant. But understand there was a time when Israel not only had to defend against madmen outside their borders, but they also had to defend against civil war as they turned against each other to eat each other. That's exactly what's going on in 2 Samuel chapter 3. Remember, Saul has died. His general's name, the commander of his army, Saul's army's name is Avner, A-B-N-E-R. We would pronounce it in English Abner. The Jews would call him Avner. He's in charge in the north. He's got 11 tribes following him. He has set up a puppet king, Saul's son, named Ishbosheth. But make no mistake, Ishbosheth is a weak man. He's a figurehead. He's an illegitimate king. He's been propped up by an army general named Avner. And what we're about to see here is Avner will flip a switch and go from support of the house of Israel or the house of Saul. He will flip a switch, go 180 degrees, and start supporting David. And you wonder, what could occur in a man's life that would make him flip a switch so quickly? We're about to find out. In verse 1, just to pick up the story again, there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. The war lasted 7.5 years. That's how long David was king over Judah, one tribe, in the city or from the city of Hebron. That's how long David was in Hebron, over one tribe, the tribe of his own tribe, the tribe of Judah, 7.5 years. So how long did the war take? For David to take over all 12 tribes, it took 7.5 years. A long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. David grew steadily stronger. The support for David's house, for David becoming king, was growing stronger. The house of Saul, dead Saul, but the continuation of his dynasty, we call it the house of Saul, grew weaker continually. So the politics are starting to stack up in David's favor. Verse 2 to verse 5, it names several of David's sons. While David was in Hebron, the Lord was blessing David with sons. It says, sons were born to David at Hebron. The first was Amnon. His second, Kiliav. I'm in verse 3 now. The third was Absalom. He's an important player in David's life. His son Absalom. The fourth was Adoniah. The fifth was Shphatiah. And the sixth, in verse 5, was Ithream. So David has sons here, 6 sons that were born to him in this 7.5 year period while he was in Hebron. I showed you this before. I don't have time to go quickly through it. It's not really that super important. But just for sake of an outline, the first 20 chapters of this book, 2 Samuel, fall into 4 divisions, 4 units. And this, chapter 3, verse 5, ends the first unit. Look at what I told you. Each unit begins with the list of, or ends with the list of names that is 4 verses long. We just saw that first list. Chapter 3 or verse 2, verse 3, verse 4, verse 5. There's your 4 verses. This is the end of the unit. It's 4 verses long. And what does it tell you? It gives you a list of David's people. Here at the end of this first section, David's sons born in Hebron are listed. When we get to the end of the second section, I will tell you, but you will already know because we'll see 4 verses that give a list of David's people. When we get to chapter 5, verse 16, we'll see 4 verses that speak of David's sons that are born when he moves to Jerusalem. The next section ends in chapter 8, verse 18, and we see 4 verses that speak of David's officials. This was his recorder. This was Joab, was the commander of his army. This person was his recorder. This person was his high priest, etc. David's officials. And the end of the last section is in chapter 20, verse 26. We see another list of David's officials. Some of these changed names. The first 3 units are generally positive. I mean, that means David generally does good things. He's living a good life before the Lord. He's following the Mosaic Law as best he can. He's an obedient, observant Jew. He's doing right by God, living life as a man after God's own heart. The first 3 units are generally positive in describing David's triumphs. many military triumphs in chapter 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He's going out to battle a lot against the Philistines and others, and God is giving David great military triumph. And those first sections talk about that. But in the last section, something else happens in David's life. It's generally negative in describing David's troubles with God. Not his triumphs with God, his sinful troubles with God. What does David do? Somebody just tell me the name of the woman. What does David do in this section, verses 9 through 20? It's in chapter 11 and chapter 12. David falls for a woman he shouldn't have fallen for. What was her name? What? Bathsheba was her name. So you say, what is it? David's having such a good life with the Lord. The Lord is blessing everything he does. This is a high point in Israel's history. What could possibly go wrong? Humanity goes wrong. That's what goes wrong. Humanity goes wrong. And so we see triumphs turn to troubles through sin. David would take Bathsheba. He would go into her against her will. And then when she turns up pregnant, David tries to have her husband killed, or does have her husband killed, when his ruse to hide her pregnancy doesn't work. So David's sin ushers in David's trouble. It's not God that ushers in the trouble. It's David that ushers in the trouble. Human David. Verse 6, 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 6. We're going to see Yahweh unify the tribes of Israel under King David's rule. 7.5 years have gone by. David's only had one tribe that he was the king over, and that's his own tribe, the tribe of Judah. Now starting in verse 6 here, chapter 3, verse 6, we are going to see Yahweh move in a powerful way to unite the other 11 tribes under David. But how will he do it? How would you do it? It's interesting when you get to Isaiah chapter 55. Anybody know Isaiah 55, what verse I'm looking for? The differences between God and man. In Isaiah chapter 55, God says something about the differences between him and man. How would you bring David to power in Israel? I mean, I'm sure if you thought about it long and hard, and maybe you haven't, but if you did, you would have an idea of how you would get the other 11 tribes to follow David. Well, God has his own ideas, and none of us could have ever dreamt up what's about to happen. None of us could have dreamt up what's about to happen. God says in Isaiah chapter 55 in verse 8, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways." Remember that? Of course you do. So what we see here in the book of Samuel is God do things in a way that only God can do things. He will bring about a change in Israel in the most unlikely and unsuspecting way. In verse 6 it says, "It came about while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David that Avner was making himself strong in the house of Saul." Now remember, in this period of time, the house of Saul was weakening. David's house was strengthening, but within the house of Saul, there was one person who was getting stronger and stronger, gaining more power, gaining more authority, and that was the commander of the army. That was Avner. This was Saul's commander when Saul was alive. This is Saul's general, and he continues to make himself strong. Saul's son, Ishbosheth, the king, the figurehead, is weakening in power as David is growing in momentum in the south. Ishbosheth is weakening in power, but even still, this man Avner is becoming stronger and stronger. That's important. I'm going to ask you a question. Here's the question. Who does Avner support as the king of Israel? Ishbosheth, Saul's son Ishbosheth, or David? Who does Avner right now support as the king of Israel? It's Ishbosheth. It's the north. It's 11 tribes. And God is about to turn this man's opinion with one statement that is uttered. Watch this. It says in verse 7, It's interesting, verse 6 says, Avner was making himself strong. The question has to be asked, how? How is it that the army general was making himself stronger than the king? And in verse 7, we get a clue. It says, now Saul, when he was alive, he had a concubine. Now, a concubine is not a wife. A concubine is a lesser social person than a wife, committed to the husband of the family, Saul, but she's a lesser wife, and it was not uncommon in the Near East, in the ancient times, in the ancient Near East, it was not uncommon for kings to gather to themselves not only wives, but concubines. And the concubines were gathered mostly so that they could produce sons or heirs for the king in case the wives could not produce an heir for the king. An heir had to be a son. Now, how many of you, just quickly and just off the top of my head, I don't know the history well, I've forgotten most of what I ever knew about it, but King Henry VIII, remember his problem in England? What was his problem? What was King Henry's problem with his wives? Why did he keep marrying a woman and killing her, marrying another one and killing her, marrying another one and killing her? Why did he do that? Because they could not produce for him what? A son. A son to be heir, to be king after him. And that's why you have all the people that he married, all the wives being killed. Well, so in the ancient times, it wasn't uncommon for a king, in order to avoid that scenario, he gathered multiple wives, and he gathered not only them, but many concubines, and he would have children with the concubines, hoping that somebody's going to give him a male child. So you have concubines. They are lesser than wives. They are legally your wife, but they're lesser than wives. But to raise up an heir, kings would gather their concubines. So in verse 7, Saul had a concubine. I'm sure he had many. But one of them's name was Rizpah. And this is what happens with Saul after Saul's death. He's got this concubine, no longer legally attached to anyone. And Avner scoops in and takes the king's concubine as his own. So Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah. She was the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, now I tell you, Avner is about to flip 180 degrees. His allegiance to King Saul is about to be wiped away. His allegiance to Saul's son Ishbosheth is about to be a thing in the past, and he is 180 degrees going to turn to David. One statement out of one man's mouth on one day of his life. One statement changes the history of Israel. Only God can do these things. How am I going to shift allegiance of the northern tribes? How am I going to shift allegiance of the army of Israel to follow David? I have to use the army commander. I have to use Avner to shift control to David. But how in the world, God speaking, how am I going to get Avner to switch to allegiance to David? Brilliant, this omniscient God of ours. Not that God would ever question like that, because we have a God that never learns anything, knows all things at one time. This is me trying to put my thoughts and how this could have happened. I'm just trying to show you that God knows all things, and the way He works, brings things about, is unbelievable to me. His ways are not our ways. So Saul has a concubine. Her name is Rizpah, and Ishbosheth says this to Avner. Why have you gone into my father's concubine? That's all he said. That's all he asked him. There's an accusation here. Why have you gone into my father's concubine is a serious and harsh accusation against Avner the commander. Why is Avner so angry at this accusation? Because he understands what Ishbosheth is accusing him of. It says in verse 8, Avner was very angry over the words of Ishbosheth. What did he ask him? Why have you gone into my father's concubine? That's it. And that one statement was enough. You're finished. Today, I will vow to make David king over all of Israel. One statement. Why have you gone in to my father's concubine? You wonder, what does that mean? Why is that such a big deal? Why is Avner so angry that Ishbosheth has said this to him? It says, Avner was very angry over the words of Ishbosheth, and he said, am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? And an American reads that and says, what in the world does that mean? How can you be angry and that be your comment, your rebuttal? Am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Makes no sense to us. Listen, I've told you about why a king has concubines, to raise up heirs in case his wives can't. Avner has taken one of Saul's concubines for himself. And again, according to tradition, in the ancient Near East, in the times in which these things occurred, it was common to take the power of the king from sleeping with his women. You hear what I just said? It was a common way to get to show yourself usurping the authority of the king by taking his wives and his concubines and laying with them. And that's exactly what Avner is being accused of doing. You, sir, are trying to steal the throne of Israel from me by taking my father's concubine as your own and sleeping with her, having sexual intercourse with her, taking her as your own. That's what's going on here. I fast forward you into the story. I don't know exactly what chapter it's in, but when Absalom, when David's son goes against David, tries to take the throne from his own father David. Do you remember the story that Absalom is counseled by men, go into David's concubines and lay with them, and then all Israel will know that you have the authority of the king. It was common in these days. If you wanted to gain the power of the king, you went in and slept with his wife, or you slept with his concubine. And that's what Avner has been accused of. You have slept with Saul's concubine Rizpah in an effort to steal the authority of the throne from me. You're a traitor, and you are this is what Ishbosheth is telling Avner in this simple statement. Why have you gone into my father's concubine? This is a serious accusation. You're a traitor, and you're one who's trying to steal the throne of Israel. You get to his expression, am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? And what is Avner saying? What is he saying in response? The accusation is not only that I'm trying to usurp the authority of your kingship, Ishbosheth, by sleeping with your father's concubine, but the other accusation that you're levying at me is I'm doing this because I'm somehow a hired hand of David in the tribes of Judah. That I'm working as a spy for Judah in your house and doing this slowly. Do you not know, clown, that I have control of your army? And while you are growing weak, I am growing strong. Ishbosheth stepped on the wrong toes on this day. He's about to find out just how drastic his statement would, the consequences of his statement would be. So the accusation is that Avner did this as a hired conspirator of David. You're working as a dog's head for the tribe of Judah. You're up here doing this at the control or command of Judah. And Avner says, am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Let me show you a verse. How did this writer in particular, how did the writers of Hebrew use this phrase dog? What is it that Avner is calling himself? Am I a dog's head? Look what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 23 verse 18 concerning the use of this word dog, Kelev, K-E-L-E-B. It says, you shall not bring the hire of a harlot. What's a harlot? You may know the name for a harlot. It starts with a P. A prostitute. So what is the command of the law of Moses? Don't bring any money earned by a female prostitute into the house of God as an offering. God doesn't want that tainted money. But what else does it say? Don't bring the hire of a harlot or the wages of a dog into the house of the Lord your God. What are the wages of a dog? This is Hebrew parallelism. Whatever the harlot is, the dog is. Whatever the hire is, the wages are. Don't bring the money of a female prostitute into the temple or into the tabernacle as an offering to God. And don't bring the money of a male prostitute, which they referred to as dogs. Don't bring the money of a male prostitute to the Lord as an offering. It's tainted money. It's immoral. God doesn't want it. Both of these are an abomination to the Lord your God. So who is the dog in Israel? It's the male cult prostitute. Ishbosheth has just made an accusation against Avner. And Avner says, do you think that I've been hired like a male prostitute would be hired by David and the people of Judah to come in here and slowly take over the power when I have all the power of your military and I could take your kingship over today if I wanted it? It was too much for Avner to hear. A male dog, again, a dog was a male prostitute. Ishbosheth is accusing Avner of being no better than a hired male prostitute of Judah hired to steal the authority of the throne from Ishbosheth himself. The accusation is he's gone too far. It is interesting that in this accusation, though, notice that Avner is not saying, I did not go into Saul's concubine Rizpah. He doesn't defend against having taken her as his own. His defense is over his loyalty to Ishbosheth and the throne of the northern tribes of Israel. You've accused me of too much. And so he says, continuing in verse 8, today I show kindness to the house of Saul. Why is it that you're accusing me like this when I have shown kindness to the house of Saul your father, to Saul's brothers, and to his friends? And I have supported you. My loyalty is to you, Ishbosheth. I have not delivered you into the hands of David. You don't think that I could deliver you into the hands of David? I'm the leader of your army. I could deliver you into the hands of the greatest army general that's ever lived in Israel, David, the killer of Goliath. The army will follow David. The only reason the army's not following David yet is because I hold you up, Ishbosheth, as their king. But as soon as I quit holding you up as their king, things will change. But today I show kindness to you and have not delivered you into the hands of David, and yet today, when I'm defending and protecting you, you charge me with the guilt concerning this woman. And now we have the statement of Avner that switches everything. Israeli history hinges on this verse. As crazy as it is, the coming Savior of the world, Jesus Christ, the power of the throne of David, all hinges on this verse, Jesus being the king in David's seed, the king in David's line. How does David become king of Israel? You see it right here. May God do so to Avner and more also, if as the Lord has sworn to David, I do not accomplish this for him. What's the this? What has the Lord sworn to David? This is interesting because Avner knows that David has been anointed king. Why has he not held David up as the king before? Selfish reasons, power hungry, authority. But he knows, if as the Lord has sworn to David, I do not accomplish this for him. And this is what Avner says after one statement. Why have you gone into my father's concubine? This flips the switch and shifts the scene dramatically. And Avner swears, he makes an oath this day to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and to establish the throne of David over Israel and over Judah from Dan to Beersheba, from the northernmost city of Israel, the city of Dan, to the southernmost city of Israel, Beersheba, I will give this kingdom to David. You watch me do it. You should never have accused me of that. While I've been friendly to you, while I've been supportive of you as the king, even though you're a figurehead king, I have supported, protected, defended you. You have done me wrong, and you now, sir, are in grave danger. Crazy, huh? One accusation. I'm going to show you a proverb here. I love the Proverbs. They're so pithy. They're so short, but they're so powerful. Look at what the Proverbs say. I asked the question, why is Ishbosheth now in grave danger? Why is he in grave danger? Because according to Proverbs 18 verse 19 and many other proverbs you could pick out, a brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. You want to give yourself something that you can barely fight against? That's closed off? Offend a brother. He says, a brother offended, and Ishbosheth has just defended his brother Avner. And an offended brother, some of you maybe know this firsthand from your lives, events in your life. An offended brother is hard to be won back than attacking a strong city, and contentions between brothers are like the bars of a citadel. What does that mean? Barriers that are hard to remove, hard to pass through. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. Have you ever experienced anything like that? Been in a row with your sister or your brother or your mother or your father? Done something to offend a close friend? Hard to get them back. Because I've dedicated and committed things to you. And you accuse me of such things? And you just want me to wash this just sweep it under the carpet like it never happened? I should forgive my brother, 70 times, 7 times? 7 times, 70 times, however he said it, 70 times, 7 times. I should be forgiving of my brother when he comes to be forgiven and asks for forgiveness. But nonetheless, the Scripture says this is hard for a man to do. Because once you're offended by someone who you have committed your allegiance to, you'd be better off trying to attack a very, very well-defended city. It's just a truth of the human heart. Anybody know this experientially? Anybody been there? Somebody has, I know. There's just no doubt. Why is Ishbosheth, the king of Israel, in grave danger? Because he has just turned away the one man in all Israel that kept him in power. In verse 11 it says, he could no longer answer Avner a word. He knew, I did this all wrong. This was not good. I did this all wrong. It says he could no longer answer Avner a word because he was afraid of him. Ishbosheth, again, was simply a figurehead king. He was propped up by the power of the Israeli army with their commander Avner in the lead. Avner held the power in the government, and now again Ishbosheth has lost the only person that supported him, that kept him in power as king, and he is fearful, and he should be. Verse 12, Avner sent messengers to David in his place. So Avner says what he has to say to Avner says what he has to say to Ishbosheth the king. You're done. I'm going to David, and I will see David crowned as the king of all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba. All of it. I'm going to see to it that with my authority and power over the army, that David becomes the king of this land, not you. And then he turns his attentions to David. His flip has been switched. His switch has been flipped, and he's not turning back. Avner is on David's side now. Unbelievable. Avner sent messengers to David in his place, and he said, whose is this land? So I'm going to give it to you. Very highfalutin man, thinks a lot of himself, doesn't he? Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel over to you. I have authority over these northern 11 tribes. David, I think you know it well, and I'm offering today my allegiance. You have to enter into covenant with me. David understands what Avner is saying. He responds in verse 13. He said, good. David's waited patiently. This David is an unbelievable man. He's waited for 7.5 years while war is going on that he's not involving himself in. He's waited 7.5 years for God to hand him the kingdom of Israel. And finally, God is going to allow a peaceful transfer, it seems, over to David after 7.5 years of war. So David says, good. I'll make a covenant with you, but I demand one thing of you, namely, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal. Remember her? Michal was Saul's daughter. David says, I won't see you unless you bring my first wife with you. Remember, Michal was the daughter that David got really as a prize for having defeated Goliath. And so he says, I want Michal back with me. When you come to see me, you bring her. What's this about? Does David miss her? Is she his true love? Is that what's going on? I see this much, much more as a diplomatic move. By bringing Saul's daughter back into his own house, David would make himself more acceptable to the northern tribes. One of my wives is a daughter of your old king, your deceased king Saul. It's okay for you to follow me as your king. A diplomatic move. Would have been much easier for Saul's people to follow David, knowing that in David's house, Saul's daughter lived as a wife. I think that's all that's going on here. Verse 14, so David sent messengers to Ishbosheth. David hears from Avner, I'm going to make you king. I'm going to give you the authority of the army. I'm going to tell them to follow you instead. And David sends messengers to the king of the north, and he says, give me my wife Michal, to whom I was betrothed for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. You'd have to go back and see the story. The Philistine king was Saul at the time. He wanted David dead. And to make David dead, he said, if you want my daughter's hand, bring me 100 foreskins. Yes, we're talking about foreskins, human phallus, male phallus foreskins. You have to kill 100 Philistine men, take the foreskins from these men, cut them off, and bring them to me. And when I have 100 of them, I will give you my daughter in marriage. And remember, David went and killed 200 Philistines, circumcised 200 dead Philistines, and brought 200 foreskins to Saul, and he was given Michal as his wife. That's what he's referring to here, that event. I killed men for her, I want her back. But it's interesting that David would ask Ishbosheth, who is now going to be a dethroned king, why is David sending a message to the king to give me my wife back? I'll let your brain process that for a minute. Why didn't David just send Avner, the guy who has all the authority and the power in the kingdom, go get my wife and bring her back? He told Avner, I won't see you until I see my wife Michal, but I have to ask the king for her. Why is that? At least two reasons. We're not told exactly why, but there are at least two reasons. He's either Ishbosheth, as the king, is the only one with the authority to take a married woman out of her home and give her to another man, which is what's about to occur. She's married to another man. And maybe the king is the only one in the kingdom with the authority to go to a man and say, she is not going to be your wife anymore. I'm taking her and giving her to another man. Maybe it's an authority issue. Or maybe it's simply Ishbosheth, as her oldest living brother, taking control of marriage in the family. I told you this a long time ago when we were talking about marriage way back in the book of Genesis, that the brothers in the family are the ones that gave their sisters' hands in marriage. With the father's authorization, no doubt, but the oldest brother had very, very much power in the house. This is Ishbosheth's sister. If Ishbosheth is Saul's son, and Michal is Saul's daughter, then Ishbosheth and Michal are at least half brother and sister. they both have Saul as a father. So he may be either acting in his role as king because he's the only one with the authority to do this, or he may be acting as the oldest living brother in the house who's in control of marriage decisions in the family. Ishbosheth sent. What is his response? The king of Israel? Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, from Paltiel, the son of Laish. Imagine that. Happy marriage, everything is fine. And the king sends someone to your house to steal your wife from you. Bizarre times. So Ishbosheth sent, and with the authority of the king, he took this woman away from her husband, from Paltiel, the son of Laish. In verse 16, how does her husband respond? But her husband went with her, weeping as he went. And he followed her as far as Bahurim, hoping somehow, probably praying to Yahweh, that this would be undone and that she would be given to him back as a wife. But when they get to Avner, the commander, Avner says to this man, Paltiel, go and return. And so he returned. What a tragedy. Sad tragedy. A marriage is broken up. Just all sad tragedies. If they would have followed the Mosaic law, if David would have followed the Mosaic law, this woman would still be his wife. There never would have been a problem in this family, but he didn't. He's got many wives now. It's a disaster. One wife, one husband wasn't followed, and now you've got this family disaster. And a family is destroyed to bring back his first wife, Michal. A lot could be said about that, but we go to verse 17. Well, we stop at verse 17. Abner is going on the campaign trail now, Avner. He has promised to David that I will single-handedly hand over to you the kingdom. I will single-handedly make sure that the 11 tribes of Israel will bring their allegiance to you, David. I'm going to go on the campaign trail. I'm going to go throughout the land of Israel. I'm going to make my feelings known, and I'm going to gather all Israel to you soon. So that's what Avner is doing. He's going out to pitch to the northern tribes that David is the rightful king. David should be king. Ishbosheth is a has-been. I am putting all my authority and power behind David. I expect you to follow. And that's exactly what we'll see. We'll finish this chapter next week when we get together. Let's close in prayer. Father,